Proceed. Okay. So so now we're officially recording, and also we are now live on our Facebook page, as well as live on our. We are now live on our YouTube channel, I guess. I'll have to check with the team that are helping with this. So let's get this started, and we are so excited to have Peggy Hoffman, for this series. And Peggy is doing this with another colleague here in Africa, Phillip Nyangweso, just looking at the whole question of volunteering. If you have been in association as long as I have, you know that one of the biggest challenges, we face, I don't know whether it's here in Africa, but I believe it's a global challenge. How do you attract, volunteers to your association? And yet when you think that you have attracted them, you are always facing with the challenge of how do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them excited? How do you keep them wanting to give more and more? And many of us get lost in there. Sometimes it's lack of understanding, the team you're dealing with, but also how do we create sufficient incentives that ensures that those that join to volunteer find value. Because whereas we say volunteering is about giving for free, we also alive to the fact that there is no free lunch in town. People want also to be able to draw benefit from volunteering. And I had earlier on discussed with Peggy, here in Africa sometimes, and in my experience, this could just be my personal experience, but I'm sure I've spoken to my colleagues and I hear this a lot. There is always a dynamics, amongst the volunteers. The whole question of, do you sometimes find yourself with the younger volunteers as opposed to, older volunteers, or older volunteers, young volunteers, who volunteers most? And I'll be asking you maybe in the chat to be able to share with us, what is the demographic of your volunteers? Are they younger people in their careers? Are they older folks? I tend to find here in Kenya that a lot of mid-level and older persons volunteer much more easily than the younger ones. And I was telling Peggy that sometimes I doubt whether it's a question of, for the older one, they are at a stage of self-actualization. So they are able to give much more because they are not chasing bread and butter. I don't know, but Peggy will be able to share the experiences. So Peggy is, just looking at Peggy's profile, Peggy is a president of Marina Management, which is an associate management company in the US that works to support and train associations, and most importantly, volunteers. I have been following Peggy for the couple of months now, and I've seen the kind of work she does in the volunteering space. So she's lived it. She's just not an expert out of the learning, but actually she's lived it. And so excited really, Peggy, to have you share your experience, encourage us, and can't wait to hear, what you have to say. And then on the other hand, we also have my very, very good friend, Phillip Nyangweso, and he will be joining us. I see he's still struggling a bit with the audio. Phillip Nyangweso is a Kenyan, just like me, but also is a trustee of the, Phillip is a trustee of the, what do you call the African Farm the African Farm Management Association, AFMA, and he's been the president of that particular association. He's been a board member at the Agricultural Economics Association, and he's also been a volunteer member of the International Farm Management Association. And currently, he's also volunteering his time at AfSAE as a board member. So he's a widely experienced association, volunteer. And we wanted him also to just come and share his experience from an African perspective. I am persuaded that there isn't much differences between the two spaces, but it'd just be interesting to hear, from an African perspective. He's lived it, he's done it. What does he see as the differences, between these two spaces? So we are up to a very exciting session. I can't wait to look for this. I've been looking forward because as a volunteer, I just want to see are some of the things that Peggy you're talking about familiar with me. So without much ado, Peggy, I want to hand this over to you maybe for the next 20-30 minutes. You let me know how we can go. Share with us. Feel free if you want to let Phillip jump in where he has an opportunity, do that. But all for you, all the best, and we can't wait to hear from you, Peggy. Welcome all.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. This is very exciting to be here with folks that are from so many different places. I am coming in from the United States this morning, and I have worked with the Coaching Federation. I have worked with the farm managers here in the United States. I've worked with a number of healthcare organizations and a number of other health-related organizations, community service, charitable giving, looking at global health. So it's great to sort of be in a family, and I think that's the wonderful thing about associations all around the globe is that we are a family. And I really appreciated your comments of I think we're about the same when it comes to the volunteer conversation. And indeed we are, as you described, the biggest challenges, which were attracting and then keeping motivated, essentially. Those are the same two challenges that come up repeatedly in the United States as critical challenges. And it's going to be interesting because the answers to those are not that complicated, but what we have found, and I would say recently really had confirmed for us, is that it's our own systems. Some of our problems are really in our own doing, and it's about how can we acknowledge this as a critical resource for us, and therefore invest in that resource. I want to share with you some things that we're seeing and doing in North America vis-a-vis this idea of how are we getting the right volunteers in and how are we fully motivating them. But I'd like to start the conversation with the research that we just completed. So Mariner Management is in the United States, it's an association management company. What that means is that we provide staffing for smaller associations. That's our niche, smaller associations. But along with that, so being home to small state associations, but along with that, we are also a leading research and trainer on how do organizations engage members in the work of their organization, which we put under that huge definition of volunteer. And very recently for the AfSAE, that's the American Society of Association Executives, for the AfSAE Foundation, Research Foundation, we completed a seminal project called, they asked us to go out there and find what are effective volunteer models for organizations that are engaging people around a trade or a profession or a shared mission related to moving forward an organization and its strategic goals. And we wound up in this survey talking with associations largely in North America, with a couple that a number of them were global organizations, so they were speaking to their volunteer cohorts around the globe. Then we also did a number of focus groups and some additional qualitative research. But we ended up with a fabulous group of CEOs, including one of your members from the African SAE, to look at the research. And so the report, which I can drop the link in during our session at some point during the time, the link gives you the full research. But let's take a look at what the research really, just the highlights of the research. And for those that I believe we've just now started streaming live, joining us, we're talking about volunteering in associations. So overall, this research, which was done at the height of the COVID pandemic, which was good because we were able to ask some very specific questions about how volunteering has potentially shifted or not, right? This study said overwhelmingly, that the folks that were already volunteering in associations were considering their work important and were intending to continue, and actually said that their willingness to volunteer had not changed. The nuance, though, in all of that was, how are you using my time? In other words, if you're using my time effectively, if you're using my time that is allowing me the flexibility, I'm all in still. So that's the interesting little kernel I want to pull out of here, because we are having difficulty finding volunteers, but a large part of it is because the ask that we are coming to volunteers with is an ask that appears too big, does not show that it has flexibility, does not embrace the volunteers' need to have their time used respectfully and very effectively. So the interesting thing is, we said, okay, well, let's get a little deeper. That's great to know that you still want to volunteer, but tell us a little bit more. And that's where we began to see that there were serious cracks in the volunteer system. Largely, that's because many of us are still operating in a mode that is last century, frankly. We've got a system that is very traditional in North America, but we're seeing it actually adopted around the globe as a very hierarchical system. And that's a problem, because it does not, it has its own challenges in how we set it up, how we train, how we attract, and it's also presuming that everybody is equally qualified for volunteer positions. Not so, right? I don't know how many of us have volunteers that we wish would go away because they just aren't in the right position. And that's, some of that is structural. So what we learned were a couple of, I'm gonna share with you kind of three elements of it, and I'm going to relate that back to the question we had at the beginning, which is how do we attract volunteers? Now, I'm coming to you, as I'm saying, I'm going to speak to the research because it is the most recent, and it did come in the throes of the pandemic. But I'm also going to come to you from the perspective of a volunteer in my professional association and a volunteer manager, and a company that has been studying volunteerism since 2008 and looking at the trends in terms of how things have changed. So finding number one that I think is really relevant for us is that we are in a data desert when it comes to what we know about our volunteers and what we know about our volunteer system. So essentially what it means is that we found out that volunteers appeared to be largely satisfied, at the same time gave some of our systems lower ratings. And association staff said they have some volunteers that they're satisfied with, but overall gave the volunteer effectiveness lower ratings. And essentially, when we started asking, well, how do you know that they're successful or not? There were no metrics. No one is evaluating the volunteer systems. So because we're not evaluating the volunteer systems and we don't have any independent objective metrics, we have this disconnect where the organizations are saying, I'm not getting enough out of the volunteers. They're not producing what I need them to produce. And volunteers saying, well, you're not probably using me as effectively as you can. The disconnect has kind of put us in a place of both of us kind of struggling. An interesting thing is, in this particular research, association staff really viewed volunteer effectiveness less favorably. But part of it was because when we asked them, well, how are you assessing volunteers or your volunteer system? And in general, there was almost no assessment. 60% said they were looking at things like Did the job get done? If we had a checklist, did the checklist get mostly completed? Did most of the people show up most of the time? Well, none of those things are tell you if the job actually produced impact. So, and then at the end of the day, I think the big telling thing is associations, 52% in this study said that they had to accept volunteers who were not as committed or qualified. So then we started to say, okay, well, what's impeding? And this was the finding that I find, to me, most heartening in some ways. It was the structure. So the structure is both what drives satisfaction and drives effectiveness. So what do I mean by that? Well, in most associations, they reported that they had a pretty ad hoc approach to volunteering. There was not consistency in how they managed their committees and boards across their association. There was not consistency in training. There was not consistency in recruitment and selection. And there was not even consistency in whether or not you had job descriptions and how and across the system, right? So we, with the help of CEOs from around the globe, we actually, a major output of this research is the characteristics of excellence, which help associations begin to look at what makes an effective holistic system that provides mutual benefit to, I'm giving an opportunity to a member or a stakeholder to do something meaningful, and that effort is actually promoting the mission and the goals of the organization. So there's three things that we really have to have in this: a valid, clearly defined purpose for the use of the volunteers that fully aligns with the capacity of the volunteer pool and the association's capacity to support it. Volunteer job design that accurately reflects what you need them to do and recognizes again the capacity of the volunteer. And three, an assessment process that offers an objective, valid, and reliable evaluation of volunteer performance, so you can apply training, you can improve orientation, you can develop robust onboarding. Now, what is interesting is I'm going to add a fourth to this, because a theme through all of our research, and I actually saw this back in 2017 pre-pandemic, is that and this gets to our finding number 3 about training, we're not training ourselves to be good volunteer managers. We're not training our staffs on how to use the volunteers that are in front of them, and we're not training our volunteers effectively. So the third thing that we came out of this was that training is our proverbial Achilles heel. The most common specific weakness identified was that we have to accept volunteers not as committed or qualified. That was 52%. Right below that was keeping volunteers engaged on task. And so if you look at both of those, what's the solution? It is going to be in your orientation, onboarding, and training. We have found in this study that many times we do this at the board level, and that's where we stop. Occasionally, we do it with our key leaders, but all the way down the pipeline, investing in this is going to solve for effectiveness. It's going to also, though, and here's a really important thing, it's going to solve for motivation, because now this is where we understand what brings people into our associations to volunteer. Over and over again in 2008, in 2017, in 2021, the research shows that the individuals that will give us time, mostly this is related to associations or organizations that are embracing people around a mission related to a profession or a trade, but you also see it when we're talking about the upper level volunteering in organizations like the Heart Association. The motivation is this combination of, I am doing something for myself and something for others. In the United States, we refer to it as pro-social. It has to have both of those pieces. And that doing something for myself is where people are saying, I either want to learn, I want to expand my horizons, I want to build my skills, I want to build my career journey. I want to build an association that invests in really rich onboarding and training, really has the capacity to really answer that particular motivation. One of the people that I follow in the volunteer space is Toby Johnson. I can get that Volunteer Pro. I can get that link to you too. She does a marvelous blog post in which she dissects how are we rewarding and recognizing volunteers. And she takes it right back to the basic model of human motivation and the fact that we have extrinsic and intrinsic. And she really encourages us to think about how we motivate our volunteers on that intrinsic way. And that includes giving them access to training, giving them access to learning, giving them access to building their own professional pathways. So I can't emphasize enough that when the research came back around again and said, yes, I really want to make sure that we ask ourselves, how can we make that happen in our own organization? So let me just real quickly, and I'm gonna pause. I know we've got some really cool things we can talk about, Mary, specifically around attracting volunteers and keeping them engaged. But I just want to sort of come back around again and say this seminal research just tells us, confirm your why. Make sure you understand how the volunteers are a strategic human resource for your organization. And if it's a strategic human resource for your organization, you're going to build a volunteer HR system around it. So you're going to clearly define the characteristics of excellence, and then you're going to adopt a framework for pursuing that excellence. In this research, we talk about the volunteer resource management model, which just simply says all the things that I just said about starting with recruitment and selection and job design, and then moving right on to training, orientation, and finally assessment. And the last element here is follow a consistent approach to assessing your system and then modeling new options. Let me pause for a moment. And again, we've got lots more ground that we can talk about, but let me see what questions, and maybe Phillip can jump in here as well and sort of reflect on some of the things that we're talking about here. Let me just pause. I mean, I can keep talking. My kids will tell you that. I've got pages of notes here.
No worries. I think let me pull in Phillip and just introduce Professor Phillip Nyangweso, who is here. You know, he is also based here in Kenya, but from a different city. Professor, I don't know, you've heard what Peggy has talked about. You know, the whole. And I think what I captured here is that many of us seems to be in a data desert. We want volunteers, but we don't know where to, get them. We don't know the attributes. You've been a volunteer leader for many years. Does some of the things that Peggy talked about resonate with you?
Yeah. Sorry for joining late. I think I forgot the timeline. I was having another meeting. I've had to interrupt it to be able to join you. Yeah. So I didn't listen to the first part of our presentation, but basically I've listened to the study she's talking about, that she was conducted to try and determine what motivates volunteers and so on. And my comment is that there are those factors that she was calling intrinsic, that drive many people to be volunteers. And some of them, people are born with them. For example, you would find that there are people who are sensitive to the feelings of others, more sensitive than others. There are those who don't care. They would see somebody being murdered and they just walk away as if nothing has happened. And therefore, you'll find there are those intrinsic characteristics that are innate that individuals have that tend to make them to be more aligned to being volunteers than those that are less aligned to being volunteers, like caring for the welfare of others, like deriving satisfaction when you see everybody doing well in society. And there are also those who would like to volunteer because it is aligned with their professional development and so on. And therefore, to be able to define what will motivate who to be able to be interested in what, depend on quite a number of factors in different communities. For me, I've served in professional associations for over 15, 20 years. And you'll always find that many people, to be able to become volunteers in professional association, they must see the value, because many professionals are very busy. Like you see, I was having another meeting, I've had to sacrifice to be in this one. And therefore, the value proposition is very, very critical in making many professionals to want to be part of that, because they would want to spend their time well. And if they care about the welfare of others, they would want, if they spend their time in volunteering, then that time must be used to make other people better, to make other people feel better. Or if it is, for example, an association, if somebody wants to leave a mark or to leave a legacy as having contributed to the ideals of an association, then you would want to be convinced that he'd be given a proper opportunity to be able to contribute as a leader or as a section of leadership that is aligned to what he does. Therefore, the value proposition is very, very critical. What is in it for me? Many Africans, like I have Nigerian friends who would always say, "Give me your thing, I give you mine." And therefore, the idea is, what is in it for me to be able to take my time to contribute. But there are also scenarios where some people join professional associations as volunteers because they want to expand their networks.
Right.
And for example, if you are an agri economist, you'd want to associate yourself with agricultural economists. And therefore, if you are told to contribute, then you'll feel you're also growing professionally and aligning with your colleagues in the same profession. Also, you may also, my experience has shown that sometimes you end up meeting people not only in your profession, but in other professions that are interlinked with what you do. And therefore, it may also open other, even business opportunities that will take you to a different level. And therefore, volunteering also opens opportunities for people to be able to grow, to engage others, that may open business opportunities, but also may promote people to become leaders. I remember when I first joined an association, I was reluctant to raise my hand to say I want to speak. But after some time, it became just normal to be able to, when people are asking questions, you just want to contribute. And therefore, my experience is for those young professionals who are still growing, it gives them an opportunity to be able to learn how to speak in public and develop their confidence, so that in the long term, their leadership qualities are nurtured, developed, mentored, and they can be able to take leadership position in the various aspects, not only in their profession, but even in their community, in their communities.
I love so much of what you're saying, because you've lived you've lived the experiences, and the stories are so important. And what you're doing, I just want to highlight, because I know when I have these conversations, people go, okay, I get all that, but how do I act? What can I do differently in my association? And what you have just painted the picture is a mantra that I have started to really say, which is start with the person, not the position, right? Because just as you said, when you first got started, it was like, you not sure you should raise your hand. If we can start saying that we're not filling positions, or we oftentimes come to the volunteer conversation with, we need to get this done, I need people to get this done. And so what we're doing now is we're going to find people to do a job that we've identified. So what's happening? We are starting from ourselves. And just as you say, Phil, I love this. When I give you my thing, you give me you give me yours. If it's not a give and take, and it's the sense that I need you to do this for me, we have lost the game. Whereas if we, in our process, so I always say, your next volunteer is the new member that just joined you. And the way you do that is you have a rich member onboarding program. And on that member onboarding program, you collect intel, like, why are you here? What do you need to get out of this relationship and this association for the next 60, 90 days, 6 months, 12 months? What is you're looking for? What brought you here? Who do you, and I always say, who do you want to meet? What kind of person do you want to meet? Do you want to meet a person who can answer this question, or somebody who is working in this kind of, I always say, who do you want to meet? So I always say, like, what do I have to make sure you have the experience of, right? And who do you want to meet? Because at the end of the day, Philip, 100% agree with you. It's for a whole cohort of people, it is the network. And I would say that for most people who volunteer in organizations related to trade or profession, it really is about meeting the people. They're either looking for somebody to answer a question, give them a resource, teach them something, or help them find their next job or their next employee, right? So the wonderful absolute thing about starting with the person and thinking about this at the beginning of someone's membership journey is we're building in this notion that how you get more out of this organization when you are involved in this organization. And involved includes digging your hands in and helping us do some work. So I wanted to highlight that, Philip, because your stories were so compelling about this idea of we need to start with the person. So practically, that means, what is your new member onboarding program? I always say to folks, listen, you can do it at the renewal time as well if you haven't done that. So go back to basics and say, how am I getting to know my members? Then if you build a volunteer profile, and I like to point to one of the organizations is the oncology nursing, and the other is RAPS, which are regulatory folks that are working around the globe. And in both cases, they have a volunteer profile. And when they need volunteers to do a job, they go to that bank of volunteers and they look for a certain set of characteristics and interest. So these profiles can say things like, okay, what is your skill set? What do you like about doing? What are your interests? What do you want to do? If, for example, in oncology nursing, are you specializing in kids? Are you specializing in adults? Are you specializing in a specific type of cancer? All of a sudden, I need a white paper, or I'm putting together a webinar to have this conversation. I'm not reaching out with a call for volunteers. Hey, anybody want to help? Instead, what I'm doing is I'm reaching out to Malcolm and Philip and Nicola and Jennifer, and I'm saying, hey, you said you were interested in this. Can I get you to help me with this? The ask is 100% different. It's like a U-turn difference. So if we would get that profile and get to know them, I think we'd make a huge difference. The other thing that I heard you say, Philip, I just want to lift up is, if I'm doing it, the value prop is important. So why is it we're so quiet about the value prop of volunteering? Why is it we are not sharing the rich story of how our members and stakeholders make a huge difference? I want to emphasize that we undersell volunteering. we don't, let me just give you a really simple example. Let's just say you have done, and let's go with real super simple. I mean, real simple. How many of you do a member survey at some point because there's an issue at hand and you're asking them, getting their feedback so that you can put together a white paper or a response mechanism on an issue? During the pandemic, we were all doing that, going out. We were doing what's happening in your workplace, what's happening here. So the impact of that is you then say, I had X number of members share their input. Now that's a micro volunteering option. We don't speak it and say X number of people did that. But then the most important thing is when you put out that white paper, or let's talk about an organization on industrial hygiene. One of the things that they did was they grew their volunteering during COVID because they were putting out these white papers. So what they did was they'd go out, they'd talk to members, they'd get some answers, they'd create a tip sheet. Then they would say, this tip sheet is the product of X number of members who stepped forward as volunteers. So now you're saying to me, Peggy, sitting back there reading this, you're saying, you mean when I do something for the organization, it results in something that people can use? Oh, and I got to meet some other people. So just what Malcolm said, it's the shared value and purpose. I love that. Thank you for putting that in there. When you tell that story and you celebrate the people in it, other people who are sitting back and reading it go, okay, so in other words, when you're asking me to do something, we're actually going to do something, right? So I think I really think we undersell that. So I really want to suggest to us that 2 real quick actions we can take from this is get to know your members from a profile standpoint. What do they want to do? How can I connect them in? And the second thing is really begin to richly tell the story. And one of the things that I did, with one of the associations, it was the Meeting Planners International, we were talking about this volunteerism, and I asked people, what did you get out of your membership? And I had about 10 people right on this call say, oh, well, I got my next job because I was on the local board of the chapter and I met somebody. And I said, okay, that is a value add of volunteering. Why are we not sharing that? So tell the story. Let's get bold and tell the story. You know, we only need to look at the Heart Association and Red Cross to see how they tell the story. So let us get some get better at that. And then the last thing is tied to the value proposition that I want us to really think about is training. I want to go back to this. Training in both how do I get this job done, but training in how do I be a volunteer. So Phillip is a great example of somebody who has learned on the job and been so dedicated to continue to give time and to build his own portfolio of experience around governance. But we don't have the luxury of very many Phillips anymore. And this gets to someone said, well, is there a difference? One of the things we talked about via email, what's the motivation between older and younger? And yes, Phillip and Peggy, we're self-actualizing now. Like, we love to volunteer. Am I right, Phillip? Like you said, I had to leave one meeting to get here. We're self-actualizing. We've had such a good experience. We want to give back, but that's not the same motivation. And first of all, Phillip, you did a great job of saying we all have different motivations, right? They can fall into a couple of big buckets. And for many folks that are early in the career, it's how is this helping me move forward in this career? So the training should be helping those individuals actually build leadership skills, which translate to our leadership in our associations. So you see increasingly, and I think ICF has this, emerging leaders programs. I'm going to really suggest that, and I'm leading an emerging leaders program right now for the Apartment Association. And one of the things that we're doing is we're building into this emerging leadership skills in general, but very specifically leadership skills for volunteering, because we're baking into these young professionals the notion that being actively involved in the work of the association is going to make a difference to the housing questions that we have in the United States. And so we need you to know the volunteer leadership skills. And we're getting, gosh, our young professionals are like just absorbing this. And part of what we do as part of the leadership program is require them to do a small project, a volunteer project. So now we're also modeling, getting them to model behavior. And Phillip, we have a number of seniors like you and me that are mentoring those individuals. So I really want us to think about how can we invest in training. And I did say that was the last thing, but I want to add one more thing. The other thing I want to mention is everybody is tremendously busy. Is there anybody on the call right now that's not busy? So one of the other things that was reconfirmed in the 21 research that was very clear in the 08 research, and we saw it again in the 2017 and reconfirmed it, as I said, and this is true for our charitable community-based volunteering as well, is we got to shorten the assignments. We got to chunk the assignments. We got to say, what can I do? There was one fun article I read, which was, what can I do in 5 minutes? Most volunteers would like to give you more time than that, but how can I streamline jobs and make them smaller? And too many times we put in a committee, and it's not a committee that we need. It's a group of people to go over here and get X done. So I just want to throw that out there as another thing that is still an enduring call to action for us. And again, I can keep chatting if there's anybody else wants to throw it in there. I know there was one other question that had to do with motivation and payment, and we can get to that if that. But let me pause and see if anybody has any questions or comments or observations, or if anybody wants to jump in. Phillip.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, also if you are speaking to young scholars who are trying to learn what should motivate them to become volunteers, and like Peggy and me who self-actualize when we volunteer. And, some of the things.
Your mic, Prof.
Any young tech who is a member, of an association and would like to become a member, one of the things, let me just go through some of the things that should motivate them. One of them, you build your network. You build your network so that as a young scholar, you find that you don't have much network, but once you start engaging your colleagues in associations, you'll find you establish not only local networks, maybe regional networks, and even global networks. And that raises your profile, because my experience has been a lot of my friends whom we have been in council in many associations have ended up being very big people, like the current president of African Development Bank. There was a time I was a council member with him, the African Association of Agricultural Economists. And there are many other examples. So those networks help raise the profile of young and upcoming professionals, and therefore be able to position them in areas where they can be able to be seen, to be heard, and also felt. Another thing is that young professionals learn a lot. Actually, when you interact with your professional colleagues who are your seniors, they mentor you and you learn a lot of skills on how to do things as you grow professionally. The other one is that the leadership skills, which I had mentioned earlier. As you volunteer, maybe in the first stage, you are just a member. The next stage, you'll be a council member. The next stage, I was even a president of African Association. In fact, there was a time I was at the airport and the migration people were telling me, where are you going? Who has invited you? And I told them, I am the president, just like you are president in this country, and therefore I don't have to invite myself to go to any part of Africa. And they said, hey, Mr. President, you can go. And therefore, it develops that leadership skills for those who are going. And then, of course, I mentioned professional development. You'll find that in many organizations, for you to be promoted, they'll ask you, are you a member of an association? Are you just a member or a leader in that association? And therefore, as you demonstrate that you can be a leader in your own association, wherever you are working, you can also be seen to be likely to become a leader and spearhead the organization that you work in. And therefore, I think those ones, for those young and upcoming professionals, if they look at them as, why should I be a member of a profession? Why should I volunteer? And so on, they should be able to guide them, be able to be motivated enough. But as also there are those intrinsic ones that we said, you need to be compassionate, you need to have a passion for what you do. And if you have a passion for what you do, definitely volunteerism will also it will also drive you to be able to seek to help others and so on. So thank you so much.
Yeah. So we could add to the value proposition travel benefits. I enjoy that. So it occurs to me that one of the things, as Phillip was saying, we can project what we believe is the value proposition, but wouldn't it be fun to sort of chart that out and then go to some young professionals and say, does this look interesting? Instead of saying, will you volunteer? Does this pathway look interesting? Because I can open the door for you. I think I was drawing, you guys can't see, I was drawing a picture of a pathway as Phillip was talking. And I'm like, yes, we can paint that picture, which I think is really interesting. But I think it really is important that we do ask folks who are younger, but what they think.
Great. I think I wanted to just turn to the audience and see if there is any question, any contribution, or any experience. And as they do that, just come on and I'll be able to allow you to speak. So one of the things, Peggy, that and then this goes to both of you, is how do you guard against selfish interests, even as you try to build your volunteerism? Because we've seen, and I see a lot here, people join in the association, they join into the leadership, but then they're using that as a ladder to their next, target. You become the president of an association, and you are able to access opportunities and spaces you would ordinarily not be able to do that. And it's not a bad thing, but also you want to be able to protect, the integrity of the organization, and you just don't become a ladder for people to pass through towards, other great opportunities. And when they get there, they even forget you, not even looking back and say, you made me. How do you balance that?
So I'm going to suggest that I'm going to go back to what the research has told us. And one of them is assessment. If you are creating an assessment process that really helps you measure all of the volunteer activities against impact, it allows you to have good conversations with volunteers that are helping and volunteers that are not. So I'm going to say that assessment is important. Assessment is difficult. We oftentimes say that oh, they're free labor, so therefore we shouldn't evaluate them. Well, the problem with that is now we create scenarios just like you're describing, which is people are using us as opposed to mutually beneficial. So we did ask volunteers that in our research, and volunteers said, oh no, you can assess us, but you know, many of the people that responded weren't against assessment. They just felt that they were doing everything right. So, you know, but they weren't against assessment. So that's an orthodoxy that we need to get rid of. But the other element is, there's two other elements to consider. One is culture. If your organization has a blind eye towards volunteers that are not effective or that are just climbing over you, you have set a message, and volunteers see that and they realize, okay, that the culture here is, this is a stepping stone. So some of it is absolutely, are you addressing it? Whether you can change it or not, are you addressing it and indicating that it is acceptable or unacceptable? This again is a tough thing. So I say, let's go back to, how are you doing your orientation and onboarding at the lowest level in your volunteer scope? How are you training people about what is accepted practice for volunteerism? When we do that, we do two things. One is we create a scenario where we are setting expectations more realistically around a mutually beneficial relationship, right? When you set expectations, you now have permission to call somebody out. If you do not set the expectations, you cannot call them out. So the other expectation you're setting is that you will be called out, because we are a community that is moving forward. Now, part of that is being very clear that you do want mutually beneficial. I want you to get something out of it. And if your goal is to use this as a ladder to get somewhere, let me help you. But it's a quid pro quo. In other words, I'm going to help you, but I need you to do this. So it's really expectation setting. And that happens in orientation, onboarding, and training. Now, just be clear about when I say orientation and onboarding. Orientation is that kind of a one-up thing, right? Where you say, here's the job, this is what done looks like, these are the resources you have, and this is the schedule following. Onboarding is, what does this job mean? And how do you work with other parts of the organization? And how do you work with each other? And how are we going to make decisions? And it tells you, when we say this is the schedule, how do we make changes to the schedule? And when we say we're going to meet at 6 a.m. or 2 p.m., how do we, what does that mean, right? It's the norms around the working. The onboarding is really important to absolutely continually recommit to the expectation. And the training is where you're teaching them how to be the best volunteer they can be, which again goes back to that. So is the answer to what you're saying, to your dilemma, simple? No. But I do think it begins at that level of, are we setting the right expectations, and how are we addressing when those kinds of scenarios happen? And then the last thing I will say about this is that at some level, I don't care if volunteers use me as a ladder and climb onto bigger things, because I'm going to tell the story of what they did with my organization, and I'm still going to be able to show the impact. So I'm also going to allow a little bit of that, because I can say, you know, the president up there, he was a member of so do by all means get the stories and tell them around the way. I'm not sure if how much that helps, but I really think that based on both the research and the practice, we're seeing that.
Phillip.
Yeah. Maybe the question I should ask is, you talked of integrity, you talked of volunteers using their position in volunteering to climb high and so on. But for me, I would say, when you are running an organization as a volunteer, you should try as much as possible to avoid conflict of interest.
Yes.
However, at the same time, when you remember, volunteer is spending part of his time or her time to add value to this other organization for the benefit of others at no salary, at no benefits, and so on. But there is part of his time when he's doing something else, and therefore it does not mean when you are a volunteer then you stop spending part of your time doing something else. You can juggle your time to ensure that you play your profession the way you play it, but you can still contribute in a voluntary manner to the benefit of some others. And therefore, your volunteering effort should not stop you to climb your ladder professionally because you are a volunteer. But you should not say you are using it because really the idea, because for example, the people I'm saying once upon a time were volunteers, we were leading some organization together. They did their job perfectly with integrity, and their profile rose not because they wanted to use it to get something bigger, but people acknowledge these people. They can serve others very effectively. They have a good heart, and somehow when those other positions came, they were also qualified because they are professionals, and so on. And therefore, I think the issue here, integrity can still be maintained. Conflict of interest can be avoided, so that when you are volunteering, give maximum effort, but same time, pursue your careers and your other higher goals that you have in your career to ensure that there is a balance in everything, and so on. And just like Peggy just said, that if some of the volunteers contributed 100% and they happen to even decide to join politics, when somebody decides to become a politician and was a volunteer, in fact, politicians are volunteers. In fact, most of the time, even the salaries they are paid is not enough to compensate them for what they do in service to community. And therefore, if somebody rises to a political office of service to others by having learned from my organization as a volunteer, that is a plus to my organization, because the experience he derived from my organization of volunteering has actually enabled him to be able to serve higher goals of serving others. So there are many ways of looking at it, but the main thing is integrity, ethical, professionalism, and avoid conflict of interest in whichever position you are serving, either as a volunteer or even as a public servant. Thank you.
Yes.
So I love some of the terms that you use, because if you're doing an orientation and an onboarding program, you're going to teach them conflict of interest, and you're going to teach them some of these other elements. So I do love that. I love that you brought those in.
Yeah. So we've run out of time. You know, it's always so fast. You know, it goes so fast. We allocate 1 hour for this, and we want to respect you. But I just wanted to quickly run through the panelists, and I recognize our president that joined us later, Mungai Infi, and also Jeffers. But I just wanted to, I wanted to check, is anyone out here with really a burning one that they want to raise before we close? A burning question or comment they want to make?
Nikki, probably I could want to say greetings to Peggy, my friend, and the rest. Sorry, I couldn't join early. I had a meeting in the office. I'm still in the office, so I said let me join in these dying minutes of the training. I know Peggy. We were together in a task force for 1 year, so I really know her. She's quite knowledgeable about voluntarism, and she has a lot that she can really give us, only that time doesn't allow. Probably, Peggy, we need to have you in Cape Town this year for our summit. So please think about coming to Cape Town. We have a big delegation from the AfSAE, led by Michelle Mason.
Oh, yes.
And my friend who you can see called iPhone, that's actually Terracon. our friend from Endocrine Society, Nick, and Mugai, Nick, and Prof. Nyangweso, you remember there when he gave a presentation about finance.
Yeah.
So we are also extending this invitation. I think we need a lot of time, maybe for more presentation and side meetings so that we can talk more about this, because these are quite interesting topics. People take voluntarism for granted. Some really, when you work with them, you feel like they're forced to serve in that volunteer position, not because they can't do much, but you realize there's totally no commitment. You know, if you get, let's say, a volunteer in an association who serves in the board, and they whenever they're needed, it's like a luxury. It's like it's not something that they take it seriously. For me, it comes out like you're forcing them. Number two is like it's a bother to them, all taking a lot of their time. So I think we need to continue talking about voluntarism and really what that helps our community, because most of us who are here, and I can tell you, Peggy, when you see Nicanor, when you see Philip, when you
Did we lose him? I think we did.
Lost him.
Okay, we lost him. Mungai, I see you raise your hand.
career.
Oh,
So
he's back.
anyway, it's a lot, but sorry,
Okay.
it's an incoming call. Sorry for that. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to more conversations on this particular topic going forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Some comments, maybe I'll come back to you to end up Peggy and Philip, but Mungai, do you have any last comment you want to make? I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Nikano, and many thanks to you, Peggy. If you permit me call you this like that, it's our first time of meeting, and thank you for for approving. I really joined in a bit late because again I was having another meeting, but I was able to follow what was shared, and having spent quite a number of years in voluntary organizations myself, I could immediately identify with almost everything that was shared when you speak about networking opportunities, travel opportunities, impact opportunities, and the growth you experience as an individual while carrying out all of these things is amazing. It's really extraordinary. I am a clear example of somebody who was very timid when I was a little boy to somebody who is very outspoken now, simply because I spent 17 years in Junior Chamber International, what is called in the US JCs. I was a volunteer for the JCs for 17 years. And in that journey, the things I learned, no university taught me, no teacher taught me. And again, these things were of great benefit to me, even when I was preparing myself for the professional world. I already had experiences in project writing, in project management, in meeting steering, in presentation skills, in facilitation skills, in negotiation skills, in leading community-based initiatives, speaking with stakeholders, or what we call now stakeholder management, in lobbying, in advocacy, and in marketing yourself. So these are things I learned along the way, soft skills which are really important for any professional, be irrespective of the sector you're in. And so I totally subscribe to Jeffers' point when he says we need to bring you back, because one of the key challenges many associations in the continent face is their inability to present their value proposition, especially to individual members or to members they're interested in signing onto their association. And so if we can have a clear-cut roadmap or a clear-cut method we can share with associations on how they leverage on their offering, in addition to their purpose or their mission, which could be, attractive to potential members, I think we would have solved to a great extent one of the challenges many associations face. So I'm a living example of everything you guys shared. And again, I'll be looking forward to meeting you most likely in Cape Town in September, so we can keep on with the conversation. So thank you very much. And thank you, Professor Nyangweso, for your usual brilliant interventions. Really grateful. Thank you.
So you have him on video now, so you can have a story to share.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So over to maybe just your closing remarks, Peggy, Philip, as we wind down.
Well, I want to thank you all for being so engaged in this conversation. I'm passionate about the fact that we can do good to bring our members in, and when we think mutually beneficial, we can help them do good for our organization. So I love the power of the conversation today. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Peggy. Philip?
Yeah, I also thank you for inviting me, and for the presentation from Peggy. It was very inspiring. There was the question you had raised during the email, in one of your emails, where you were talking about whether volunteers should be paid.
Oh.
To pay or not to pay?
Should be paid, or whether they should be facilitated, be reimbursed. I don't know if you discussed about that in my absence.
No, we didn't.
No, we didn't. I'll give you the short version.
Yeah.
Which is to say that, there's two sides to that. There's the legal side, and in many cases, the reimbursement, at least in the United States, for example, is you can't pay a volunteer. But the motivation side is that we really, if we're giving them other things, they will not ask. They do not need the dollars. But that doesn't mean that we should make it expensive to volunteer. So I always say, minimize the expense, maximize the experience.
Philip, from an African context, there's nothing. There's no law that bars volunteers from being reimbursed. What's your experience?
From African perspective, or from my experience, both in Africa and in other international organizations, in Africa, you find that of course there are no salaries for volunteers,
right?
But for once in a while, when you travel, sometimes you find your air ticket could be paid for.
Yes.
Maybe you could be reimbursed for transport and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But in an organization, for example, I'm a council member of International Farm Management Association. Normally, most of our meetings all over the world, you pay everything for yourself.
Yes.
Including transport, and therefore it depends on the part of the world where the association is based, and also the purchasing power and other constraints that the individuals face. So if your per capita income is very high, there is a possibility you can say, I have to pay for everything for myself. But there are countries where you'll find that the heart is willing to volunteer, but the capacity even to take you to where you will volunteer is not there. And therefore, the balance of some of those variables for many volunteers in developing world, and not only in Africa, even in Asia, you find different environments dictate different things. And the volunteer must operate in some environment. Therefore, it's important to have all those variables to be able to make a proper decision. Otherwise, thank you so much for inviting me. I hope we'll meet again in Peggy, maybe down south. You said in Cape Town, and so on, so that we can benefit, the association can benefit more from her.
Well, we'll have Jeffers talk to Michelle.
Definitely.
I will.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so very much, all of you, for your time, for volunteering your time. I know I pulled Professor Nyangweso from class to come and speak to us. So really, really grateful. And thank you, Peggy, for waking up so early in the morning at 6 a.m. To be able to join us on this call. And I'm going to end with a quote, that you said, the spirit of volunteerism is about minimizing the expense and maximizing the experience. And I think that's how we're going to end it there. Thank you very much. And for our audience, this happens every last Thursday of the month. So we will be having our next session again this coming month of March. Do sign up if you're interested. You can sign up for the series so that you don't keep signing in every event, but definitely be sure that we will be bringing you another exciting session. This is meant to help you develop professionally, but also build a network with colleagues here. So if you need any of the networks of the people that have been on this call, do reach out to us. We'll be able to share the contacts with them. So thank you very much and see you next time.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.